You'll be pleased to know I'm not here to talk you through line by line the cloud strategy or the ICT strategy. What I just want to do is talk a bit about the reasons behind why the government goes there, and then give a bit of an explanation of what our language means. I think one of the challenges we have is everybody uses the word cloud, and to some people it means fluffy things that float through the sky, to other people it means very, very different things. We will tell you what we mean by cloud and as a service and managed services. I think that's really important for the industry to actually understand the language we're using, and we're starting to use this commonly across government. And I've been working with the CIOs on getting our language common, because some of the challenges is actually that issue. Where we came from. I put these up because I think it's really important that we understand where we came from and where we're going. We came from large facilities with no windows, rooms from men with white coats, and we had dumb terminals. And for those people in the room my age, you'll remember this. For some people, this is still life. Where are we going? It's really interesting, because where we're heading, large facilities with no windows, men and women probably not in white coats, but in hoodies and trackies, with dumbish terminals. A lot of them are fairly dumb because we're actually using other things. So why is everyone so confused about what we're doing? Because actually it hasn't changed that much. Well, it did in the middle. The challenge was, when we started doing ICT, we all had very short relationships. In fact, we used to send things via the road, not by the internet. We used to send our punch cards or our tapes down the road to the mainframe bureau service, I think it was called in those days, now probably cloud. They would do the transaction and send a whole heap of paper back with all the computations done, which we would then use in the business. That relationship lasted 12 hours, 14 hours, 24 hours. Then as we got more mature and decided we would embed this more in our business, we needed to build things to do it ourselves. And actually we went up to relationships, and while I show them there as about 20 years, some of them are probably 30 years. We still have applications on the mainframe still operating 30 years after they were built for a 10-year life. And they're still operating really well, and they're still doing it. And interestingly, the death of the mainframe has been overstated greatly. In fact, in my previous jurisdiction, the mainframe processing was increasing at 20% a year, and has been year on year for the last 10 years, and is still increasing. Mainly because it's no longer a batch processor, it's actually part of just back-end computing. So, in a sense, we have moved through that, and we're actually moving back towards relationships that can last seconds. If I do a Google search, I only have a relationship with Google for the seconds it takes to do that search, through to days, and probably in an enterprise through to years, because we want to guarantee services and we want to work our way through it. So why are we doing it? So the only thing I can say about that is change has been continuous and working through, but also some things haven't changed that much. The other issue I hear all the time when I work in this industry is the industry reasons why cloud is good. Yeah, we all know those, and I'm not going to talk about them. But it's actually, the challenge is, why are the business reasons that as a service, including cloud, is good for us? And this graph, I think, is really a key slide, because it's what actually happens with digital disruption when it happens. It happens really, really slowly, and then it hits a cliff and drops off the end. And if you're in Kodak, and I'm presuming some people here have worked in this industry, most of the people in the industry didn't see that cliff coming at them. In fact, I went to a major IT company in about here, probably a bit past 2000, and they were still doing research into printing capabilities. And I mean millions and millions and millions of dollars research into printing of photos. That company no longer exists. So in a sense, this is one of the issues we're dealing with. And what's interesting is, in ICT, things either fail quickly, and we all know a lot of those, Newtons and PDAs, and you can name them, or they work for a very, very long time and then fail suddenly. And the two I'll use in this meeting, in fact, most of you understand. I remember when a fax machine was new and came in. In fact, they were based on heat technology, and the pictures disappeared after 6 months. Finding a fax machine in most offices, it's usually in the storeroom, gathering dust, or just there to get so you can order lunch from the cafe down the road, because the only thing they use is fax. They're probably not using a fax, they're probably using fax technology on a computer. A machine, I don't think, and there are people in this room that probably, when I mention fax, look at me very strangely. The other one I talk about is printers. or more is the photocopiers. In a sense, they've become, we don't talk about photocopies anymore, they call them FDs. They still photocopy, but we very rarely use that technology. We usually scan the document and then copy it and then print it if we want to on a printer. So, in a sense, those two technologies have lasted a long time, but their demise has been sudden. We've been working through those issues as we work our way through it. So why does a business want us to do this? A key issue is that actually at the moment, the way we deliver ICT in the Queensland Government is actually restricting the government from undertaking the renewal and change that it wishes to take with the way government delivers its services to Queenslanders and how it provides good life within Queensland. One of the key issues with the value equation every time we look at changing business is we have this sunk cost in our back-end ICT. That's both in equipment that's on the balance sheet, and we have to work our way through how to deal with that. That's in software, but it's also in people and services. So every time we're making a decision, there is this, and it could be described as a rock or an anchor on that decision because it's actually tied to investment we've got. So the government's decided it wishes to actually get rid of that anchor and allow the business to make decisions on how it delivers its service in the best way and actually work their way through it. So in a sense, that's the key issue. So it's really about stopping lock-in and making ICT a key component of why you and how you will deliver services, and it's slowing down the change. So when I talk about these issues, three key issues for the business. The ability to adjust the ICT enablers to meet the changing business needs, so delivering flexibility to the business in how it delivers its services. A key one for this room is enabling the government to use the technology push and the technology developments quickly enough to gain value and actually change their business models. So it's that push and pull requirement. And the third is to be able to directly link the ICT enablement cost to the service being delivered, which is actually quite difficult at the moment. And you saw Tony's conversation. While he's a cost centre, that's quite an artificial linking to the services. So the conversation there is actually to give agility through the ability, but also transparency in where money's being spent and what the true costs of services are. Until we understand the true cost of services, we can't make good decisions of where the services should be delivered. So where are we going? Well, that's pretty obvious. For those people who haven't read all those 4 documents, which are public, I would suggest if you're a supplier to government, you should have read them, and probably more than read them, understood the direction. So we have our strategy, which is going towards 12 months old, and we're heavily into implementing, and we have an action plan, which is actually a key implementation to that strategy, and Tony talked about some of those issues. We also have a management framework, which governs how we're doing that at the across-government level. That doesn't impose on agencies, but that is how we're doing it at the cross-government level. And just recently released is an addendum to the strategy. It's not a new strategy. It's bringing cloud into the strategy. And yes, we are going cloud first, but it doesn't mean we're going cloud only. So be aware that this is a journey we're on, that there will be decisions made, and the 2 key issues of business fit and value for money will always be a key component of government decision making. So now I just want to talk about how we deliver these and what we're talking about. And we're going to use a 3-dimensional model. It could be about 30 dimensions in the end, but I think 3 is about the most. And actually doing a single dimension conversation simplifies it overly, and we need to talk about it. So the 3 dimensions we're going to work about is the ICT layers. Height, for those who have been around a long time, they used to be called ISO. They've had a lot of names in life, but they've changed, and there's probably about 5 models. There's about 7 to 5 to 10, depending on which model you use, but we'll stick with that. There's a breadth in how we deliver services, which is the business models used to deliver those services. And there's a depth, and that's really around the complexity of what we're trying to do. And unless you have a thought about those 3 dimensions, we'll work our way through it. So the first dimension, basically the breadth of service models, and I'll try and just, so down this end we're talking about actually delivered in-house, predominantly where the government is today. There are exceptions, etc., but if you're kind of averaging everything out, that's where we are. Through what we're calling ICT-as-a-service, which includes 2 components. What we're calling managed services and what are called cloud services more generally. And I'll talk a little bit about, because they actually overlap. They're not mutually exclusive, and people do it. Down to actually us not doing any ICT at all, but buying a business process directly from the market. And in fact, we're starting to see much more of this starting to happen. So, and in there, in managed services, and these are all arbitrary names we've just decided that we will use because actually we can have the arguments about it, but management services, co-location, hosting infrastructure, hosting applications, and we're using the bog standard NIST definitions for cloud. There's a set of characteristics to each of those which are actually really important to understand. And the ones, there can be hundreds of them, but we've actually talked about contract length, which really comes from long-term relationships down here, and even in-house as well. It's not not a written contract, there is a contract around how we deliver that, through to variable at this end, but in cloud it tends to be much shorter, and that's one of the key issues we work with. There is a hardware and software asset ownership, which tends to be government down this end and provider up this end, but also there's some issues about government in the middle there. Time to implement is a key issue. Tends to be longer down this end, medium, and getting shorter as you go along. And the employer of the person actually doing the task changes as you move your way through it. If that's any surprise to anyone, I'll be very surprised. A key aspect of this is also what skills do you need on either end of the spectrum. And it's a key issue for government as we work our way through it. So skills down this end of running, managing, doing, operational, screwdrivers in back pockets, pocket protectors, etc. This end, much more about management skills, vendor management skills, understanding the market, actually strategy goes, but there are some skills that also go right across. Business analysis, strategy development, etc. The government will never give up those as the requirement. And there are a series of trade-offs as you move through this. In fact, a lot of them are mutually exclusive, and it is actually a decision by the business which one of those trade-offs they want to do. The height. We're just using one of the models here. So basically the bottom end is the infrastructure, and Tony talked a bit about how people don't even know where that's coming from, and they're becoming less and less interested. And then the stuff on the top, which is much more part of business and part of the government, but not all. And then you've got management and security overlaying those towers. Right, so if we talk about in-house, that whole stack is being done by government. Actually, while we say we're majority in-house, we haven't ever been there. We've never owned all our networks. We've never actually owned the telephone networks, the PSTN, etc. So it's minimal use of external suppliers. Through to managed services actually depends on how high in that stack you go. You'll see much more of this going out early, and in fact from Tony's demonstrative talk, and you talked about at the last pit, education, talking about those sort of things, but also these starting to move. And this is where the overlap is. If you talk about cloud services, you're actually talking about the same stack, but a different business model to deliver, and subtleties in that business model. And then if you actually come right down to the full service, that's a whole stack delivered by someone else, including the full service where government is tending to head. Then we talk a little bit about depth. Basically, simple, standalone, consumer-based capabilities which we use. And Andrew talked about those today. We're using LinkedIn, we're using Facebook, we're using Twitter. In fact, we're using a whole heap of cloud capabilities already, not in core delivery, but certainly in when we're engaging with externals. We then talk about kind of middle complexity issues, which tend to be black boxes joined together, so they tend to be easier to isolate out, and then you can actually buy them as separate components and join them together. And through to full complexity, there are a whole heap of systems, not a huge amount, but quite complex systems. And they're going to be the most difficult to deal with, and then when Tony talked about his applications, that's what he's talking about. Some of those systems are totally integrated, have business processes embedded in them, and are quite complex to change on behalf of the business. So, a couple of examples. Emails top right, and in fact, if you heard Tony, a lot of us are going cloud straight away. You could question whether O365 is as a service or cloud. There's some interesting academic conversations. I won't care. Everybody calls it cloud, so we're quite happy to call it cloud. So a lot of people are heading in this space as time goes on. Some agencies actually have to take a separate step in the middle to get themselves off dead technology before they can move, because you can't take the leap. And if you've been reading the press recently, a lot of people are being challenged by their email transitions, not because of the technology, but how they've used the email system and embedded it in their business. And they haven't had kind of discipline on how much email is in email boxes and a few issues like that, which then makes it really, really difficult to move. So there will be some agencies that need to take a middle step, and there are a couple of big ones doing it at the moment who are on very, very old platforms, who need to get themselves modern before they can move, because otherwise their whole business would collapse around them. And something like Q Prime probably sits back left to you. In a sense, highly specialised, will take time to move. That doesn't mean it won't move over time. It just means that it'll take longer and we'll work our way through it. And actually, interestingly, where it'll move first is in the bottom layers. The top layers will probably stay there, and it's starting to work its way through. Where at the moment? Well, we're predominantly down this side. When you look at our IT shops, that's where they probably are. They'll have examples around the rest of the cube that they can show to, but that's where they predominantly are. Where do we want to go to? Well, we want to go basically back right. But we know that there will be bits sitting out in the other areas over time, and that will change as we move our way through. These will be available on the web, by the way, so you're happy to see. I just want to also cover off, as the final slide, a conversation, and in fact Tony's right in the middle of this, and I think it's quite important to understand that actually government is a really complex beast. In fact, state government, I would argue, in Australia is one of the most complex organisations that exists in the world. The breadth of its business is scary, and from a cross-government position, I walk into agencies and walk out each time going, thank God I don't have that guy's job. Because when you dig into their business, it is really, really scary. Because every one of them's got really key issues to deal from a business sense. But when you put police, schools, hospitals, prisons, scientists, and kind of that real breadth of capability, you can't deal with it as a single solution. Government is a federated organisation, and it needs to deal with itself as a federated organisation. So what we're talking about here is basically starting to cluster like capabilities together as we work our way through. And that's already happening. It's already happened. We've got Tony sitting here as a classic example of that. But health, kind of. Public safety, we've got PSBA being formed. It's starting to work its way through, not just within the ICT space, but certainly across the business. So in some senses, that could change. We don't know what those clusters will end up with, and they will change over time as business changes. And so they won't be that common. There are then always really specific business apps. The one I use, in fact, Tony, you'd be pleased to know, the one I use is actually the fire ant management. Right? There'll be apps that actually just do one thing and are there, how they deliver it. And they belong to a business unit, and they're always going to be there, and they're always going to be around. But there are also common systems which we need to get the best commonality out of we can, and we need to move to actually not just common within government, but common within the industry. We need to get out there and get the vanilla solutions, get them as cheaply as possible, and just deliver them, and they become disappearing. And actually they're starting to, it's a bit like the network, etc., is disappearing to people. They don't know what network they're on, they don't really care as long as it works, and when they plug in, they do it. In fact, interestingly, that's growing, because as we go to mobility, in fact, kind of a lot of the workers that Tony deals with want to be able to just pull out their phone, pull out their tablet and work. And that's where the challenge comes from, and that's where we need to do it. That's the end of my talk.